CEO Live Talks.
I am Dr. Swanee Jett, and I have a passion for public health for over 30 years. Now, I'm in a position to affect change, and these are the critical conversations about health in our community with the people who can help me make those changes. Good afternoon. Welcome to CEO Live Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Swanee Jett, and today I have another good friend on the stage, Mr. Vincent James.
All right, my brother.
So, as we customarily do, we try to liven it up here. Everybody in the audience, this is a nice sunny day. Finally, we're getting
Yes.
to some new weather,
Yes.
and a lot of people don't know everything you do Data Care. I've been on for the last 3 years, just at the magnitude of the service you provide. But before I go there, what I customarily do is talk a little bit about your background and where did you grow up and
Okay.
things like that.
Yeah.
Interesting things.
Interesting thing. Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize, even
Right.
as long as I've been in this city, I've
Right.
born and raised in Louisville, educated in public school system,
Mm-hmm.
graduated, proud graduate of the Atherton High School,
Mm-hmm.
and went to the University of Louisville and majored in finance,
Okay.
and graduated with a finance degree. Went to work at GE Appliances, and worked there for 12 years. And I did a
Wow.
lot of different things there. The last thing I was doing with GE, this was the ending of Jack Welch's
Okay.
time at GE, transitioning to Jeff Immelt. And one of the things he was wanting to leave a legacy around Six Sigma,
Mm-hmm.
in particular transactional Six Sigma. And so I was a black belt in terms of that
Okay.
initiative at GE. And then I decided to leave GE and pastor full time. All this time I started pastoring. Simultaneously, I was working at GE.
So let me go back to this because you bypassed this because a lot of people are not familiar with this jargon of Six Sigma.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I'm a partial black belt in Lean Six Sigma,
Okay.
which that's a lot with production lines
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the MEG process, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control.
Right.
Which means you have a problem, you solve a problem,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
explain what type of Six Sigma you was in.
I was involved in transactional Six Sigma, which is
Right.
uses the same tools,
Mm-hmm.
all the things in terms of Lean Six Sigma as it relates to process improvement.
Okay.
And so we were focused around customer service.
Mm-hmm.
We built a call center based on Six Sigma
Okay.
principles in South Dakota. I remember that project because I was in South Dakota, had never been there before. Was
Mm-hmm.
traveling there.
Quite different.
Quite different, to say the least. And so in terms of really looking at projects that really centered around how do we improve quality of service
Okay.
through whether it's doing time motion studies with folks in the call center, or either whether in terms of looking at how parts were delivered and shipped in terms of decreasing the defects. And that was really what it's all about. How do you improve the quality by decreasing the defects? And so those are the kind of projects we were working
And
on.
that's usually so. Usually have a committee, everybody trained in
Yeah.
Lean Six Sigma, and then they sort of try to look for a timestamp of a project. So I'm assuming the call center popped up just because people were on the phone too long, or they wasn't asking the right questions, or
Yeah.
wasn't providing the right information.
Well, it's all the above.
Okay. Okay.
In terms of with the call center, like for instance, in terms of the length of time someone was on a phone, in terms with a customer, and so we're always trying to improve it because seconds are dollars.
Right.
And so what we were doing was wanting to take out the cost of the fact that you have this representative on the phone for so long. Whether sometimes it was a technological improvement, sometimes it was a process improvement
Okay.
in terms of being able to expedite the time. Many times it was technology because you would see a lot of the systems, they would get hung up in different systems. And so we were building out new systems to be able to transparently flow through all the other
Okay.
systems. And so that improved the timing, which, took out millions of dollars
What
throughout the
about
year.
what if you just found somebody that you hired in and they just wasn't astute enough to ask the question? What did you do?
In what way?
They just wasn't intelligent enough to answer the question.
Okay. Oh, yeah. As it
They
relates
might
to
have been
Six Sigma.
right.
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. Because one of the objectives is you're working with a team.
Right.
You're coming in as the experts around the tools,
Right.
but essentially you're relying on folks who are doing the job every day.
Right.
And so essentially what I would do, I could work with anybody, even the folks that didn't know. I could learn something from them in terms of what they didn't even know about their job.
Right.
But it was really me asking the right questions to be able to get it out of folks
See,
who was
me, when I
there.
just run to somebody in the call center and it was a technical question they couldn't answer, I would train them.
Uh-huh.
I give them 3 opportunities. After
Yeah.
that, then I got to move them to another function.
Oh, you talk, yes. Oh, well, with that, when they couldn't, with folks like that, yeah, they're gone. This was not a good fit.
It was not a good fit. We could scream, be like,
Yeah.
we probably need to give a test now on before we bring you into the call center.
Yeah, well, we did that. I mean, when what we did in terms of building out these new call centers, we actually had an ideal profile of a successful, call representative. And so we knew, from background, all this stuff was driven by data. And so the data says that this person should be excellent, and the data would say this person is probably going to struggle because of just the various traits we were looking for.
Now, you went into finance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So where did you grow up?
Right here in Louisville.
Where?
In West Louisville. I grew up on 808 Southwestern Parkway, right in between
all of a
Chickasaw and
sudden you said,
Shawnee.
I want to go to college and major in finance?
Yeah. This was my dream. I was
All right.
going to go to the University of Louisville, major in finance, and then I was going to go to the Wharton School of Business and get an MBA. Then I was headed to Wall Street. I was going to be an investment banker.
Okay.
That's what I always wanted to do.
So what stopped you?
Love.
That four-letter word.
That four-letter word, and love and a calling. Because what I did when I was doing my senior year, I was really struggling with my call to ministry. I'd grown up in the church, grew up at Lambton Baptist Church, and I have what they call a Timothy testimony. I was raised in the church and didn't really drift away far from the church.
Right.
But during my junior, senior year, I was really, debating as to whether or not I wanted to preach, this call to preach.
Right.
And so struggling with that, I said, well, let me go to school and see if I'm interested, if this is something that I really want to do with my life. And so I actually started graduate school during my junior year at the University of Louisville at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And so while I was there, I really came in contact with a lot of folks, from across the country who had been at the school, had different struggles, was in the private sector, then, was in church and working through that struggle. And I really came to understand that this was part of my calling in my life.
So why was it a struggle?
Because I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to preach.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I love teaching, and what a lot of people don't know, and why a lot of people don't even know what I've done in my career, is because I'm an extreme introvert. And so everything I've done in my career has been, you had to be an extrovert in some sort of way.
So let me ask you this question, because, my daughter sort of put me in this category one day from a psychological standpoint. So I was thrown off. And so she gave me a test. Right? So when you're done with your day, you have had conversations with people. Do you go home and, laugh it up and talk to other people? Do you go sit in the corner? Do you go just drift off in the sunset and don't do nothing?
Yeah. Oh, I crash. Yeah, I don't do anything. But yeah, I need at least an hour to just come home and decompress.
Okay.
And, and now I've been married for 37 years.
Okay.
And my wife knows that.
She's used to that
She's
now.
used to that, yeah. She knows when I come in, I'm just going to decompress about an hour, and then I'm good. I'm ready to go back. But yeah, from dealing with people and working with people, which I love people, but it drains me in terms, especially large groups.
I didn't recognize, and I was having a conversation with somebody today, and he was like, you have a persona. You're Dr. Jet. You're forward facing, you're out in the community. But you probably somebody else when you're at home. I said, yeah, when I go home, I'm probably in the corner. I play with the kids, but I'm off in my own little world. I have minimalism of words. Even if I go smoke a cigar, I'm usually in a corner.
Yeah.
I'm not talking. I'm just watching the TV.
Right.
And I'm just listening. So when my daughter told me that, thank you, Lexi, she confirmed it. I was like,
Yeah.
darn, I'm an introvert with extrovert tendencies.
That's me.
And
I know exactly what you're talking
yeah,
about.
I would have never believed it because I always thought it was the life of the party.
Yeah, yes. I believe it. It's interesting. It was my freshman year at Southern Seminary. I had taken this Myers-Briggs,
Right.
personality
Right.
exam, and so, I'd never taken anything like that prior, and so it came up. I was like right in the middle between an introvert, extrovert. A lot of the numbers were indicating that I could go back and forth, but I have a preference in terms towards
So you was
introversion.
an I and mine was an E.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah. See,
still
right.
appalled at that. It's like, well, maybe I was at that time.
Yeah,
Maybe now I'm just,
yeah. I was an INTP.
okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was an ENTJ. And for you that watching, you probably need to go back and look that up with Myers-Briggs. But that changes.
yes, it
So,
does.
I grew up in a household was very heavily in ministry, especially my grandmother. My brother preached at one point. My father preached at one point. And people always thought I had that voice to go preach. And they said, you give great speeches. We can see you being a preacher one day. And I was like, no.
Right, right. Well, that's how I felt.
I said, yeah, God got to make a strong tap on the shoulder.
Right, right. Strong
A
tap.
strong tap
Yes, yes.
for me to go there. And I just think, I don't mind helping people and
Right,
educating people. But one, you're viewed in a certain way, which I don't do nothing bad.
right,
Right?
right, right,
But it's just the fact that you're pouring so much into people.
right.
You're giving so much to people. And then I often wonder, what am I getting back to, replenish me?
Right.
But
Absolutely.
also it's another drain on time,
Yeah.
which a lot
Yes.
of people don't realize.
They don't realize. Yeah.
Because I go to St. Stephen's, or I watch on TV, and I'm like, how many services does he have? Like, wow, like I could do one.
Right.
You
Right.
might want to videotape that joke.
And just show it to everybody else.
Show it to everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm not jumping 2 or 3 places to give a sermon
Right.
yet.
Right. Right.
So, growing up at the time, you grew up in the West End. How was it back then? Did you
was
have any
incredible.
brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have an older sister,
Okay.
Carol. She is 4 years older than me. We was 4 years apart.
Okay.
So I was always known as Little Vincent.
Okay.
All of her friends referred to me as Little Vincent.
right.
But I had an incredible childhood growing up in West Louisville. My father he's 90 years old, still lives by himself on the Parkway. I grew up at 808 Southwestern Parkway.
Wow.
And for me, I had just incredible mentors. I had William E. Summers III. He lived down the street. And I remember me, he was my first black millionaire that I known, in terms of used to own WLOU. And then Julius Price, who was the CEO at Mammoth Life, he lived behind me about a block away from my house. And so I had principals, I had doctors and lawyers, I had Dr. Frederick Sampson at the time was always in Ebony Magazine is one of the top preachers across the country, and so I had no choice but to succeed because of the black excellence that I was around all my life.
Tune in to CEO Live Talks with Dr. Swanee Jett every Saturday at noon on Wave 3. In this thought-provoking series, we bring you conversations with influential leaders, visionaries, and changemakers who are making a difference in their communities and beyond. Don't miss an episode. Mark your calendar for Saturdays at noon on Wave 3 to watch CEO Live Talks with Dr. Swanee Jett. Together, we can shape a brighter, healthier future for all. I've had Dr. Ricky Jones on the show, Dr. Reverend Cosby, and we talked about the black excellence that was just everywhere in the West End, right?
Right.
And now we see something different.
Yes. Yes.
So what has changed besides the obvious?
Yeah, I think so much has changed. I think, I saw it changing early in my childhood. For the first time, when you saw a lot of laws that were being passed and black families were able to now move in what they call moving toward the east,
Right.
and being able to have open housing and non-discrimination, you started seeing a lot of the black professionals to leave West Louisville. So it was a slow drip. that you started to see this, and people wanted to increase the quality of life for their families, and in which I celebrate families and being
Right.
able to move and be mobile. But along with that, you started seeing businesses on the decline. The businesses were struggling. You started seeing them going out of business. You started seeing a lot of other things starting to happen within the community of a lack of investment. You weren't seeing as many in terms of doctors' offices. Those doctors that were aging were dying and they were not being replaced. So you've seen a lot of the professional services. You saw a lot of things just shifting. And when you saw that shift, the lack of investment, then it became a problem in terms of a challenge,
Yep.
because now you have a community that has not had investment, has not had access to health
It
care,
became hereditary.
and over generations then,
Right.
and so when that took place, you started to see what you're seeing in the community now. And that's it's been it's been very hurtful for me,
Right.
because I grew up at a time that West Louisville was thriving.
Right.
Now I and it's always been my vision, and that's why I remain and love West Louisville. I love all of Louisville, but in particular where I grew up, wanting to see the community on the uprise. And so I really have hope, and I really see some positive things happening. I mean, the incredible work that you're doing at Park Duval,
Yeah, thank you.
as it relates to healthcare outcomes and seeing people's quality of life improving. I think the Goodwill Opportunity Campus with Goodwill, and then you have Norton Hospital. So, there's over $100 million that's been invested.
That's
And
true.
Dare to Care is going to be soon. Starting a building project that will be, in West Louisville, that would be anywhere between a $40 and $50 million project. So a lot of things you're starting to see, beginning to change. And so still miles to go, because a
still
lot more
miles to go.
investment needs to happen.
Right.
I think what we're seeing now is really just a drop in the bucket of what's really owed and due in terms of the community.
Is it possible that those, I would say, influential and affluent African Americans come back to the West End?
You said, is it possible?
Is it possible?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's possible. I think, one of the things I started seeing with my son, he was an operations manager at Centerplate in South Carolina, and he started dabbling in terms of real estate. And he said, Dad, I really want to launch my real estate business and want to do like my grandmother, who was an entrepreneur. She was the oldest broker. Had her broker's license all the way up until she was 98 years old.
Good grief.
And so her influenced me and my son. And so he started a construction company, and his business just took off. And a lot of his properties were in West Louisville that he was working on, either building or remodeling. And what I started seeing is a younger group of young African American professionals that were moving back into the community. And I still see that happening, and talking with my daughter and seeing her friends and others that I know that are, making an intentional investment in West Louisville to come back.
And I know, myself and the board of Park Duval, we are looking at actively investing, even though we working on farmers market, but some other entities. But I still see some struggles. I'm working with the Parks Alliance to improve the parks. Everything that I do, because I used to be a health commissioner, I think upstream.
Right.
What do you think, your pew and the citizens of West End Louisville can do now? Because now what I'm seeing, and recently I went to the Capitol to deal with House Bill 4. We had the protest, Breonna Taylor, people in the streets. You saw a lot of white guilt and a lot of people giving donations to causes. Now we're on the opposite extreme, far right.
Right.
So what can we do now as citizens?
I think the most important thing for me, definitely having a business background, I lean more toward in terms of the economics of it all. Because when you think about, the 60s and the civil rights movement was dealing with civil rights. Now we need to deal with civil rights.
Right.
And so, I think it's bringing back businesses to the community. That's going to start, I think, in terms of continuing housing development. I think the things that the community can do as a whole is continue to demand, levels of investment from, private sector and the public sector. being able to bring those dollars to the community. Every community does that.
Right, right.
My name is JT Douglas, and I am the Director of Development and Marketing here at Park Duval. I'm in charge of all of the fundraising efforts to help us do some of the great work we do here at Park Duval. The people that come to Park Duval, they're here for a reason. They're here to see us. They're coming to the health center because they don't feel good. And I think it's great work that our physicians and providers do for those patients by helping them.
So I remember, because I grew up in Chicago, I had a friend, William Hudson, was in a Jet magazine, Ebony magazine, at the age of 12, became a minister, which I thought was fairly young, to be in a calling
Right.
at the time. And then, my brother probably was 13 at the time, sort of followed that footstep. But there's a struggle because you're such a young person.
Right. Exactly.
And you have a calling. What struggles did you face being 21, giving your first sermon? But you're not 25 yet.
No,
So your brain ain't fully
it
developed.
ain't fully developed yet.
Right.
Yeah, that was a whole thing in terms of one aspect of one of the reasons I struggled so much was because it was the burden and the weight that you carry. And I had a lot of my friends that I grew up with, their fathers were pastors. And so I would see the behind the scenes when the pastor comes home, and the kids' lives and how they lived their lives in a glass bowl.
Right.
Everyone was looking at them, had all these expectations,
Right.
and so
Right.
I'm thinking forward, I'm like, number one, I don't want to have that kind of burden and stress on my life, nor I plan on having kids. I want my kids to go through that as well,
Right.
and so I was really conscious about that, and so, but ultimately God won. And he said, I'm going to take care of you, your kids, and all of it. And so it was in that moment that when I saw that and recognized, and then I had some incredible mentors that came into my life around that time, that shared with me and showed me how you really can have a balance in life. You don't have to be like others. You can blaze your own trail. And so at a very early age, I had that kind of mentorship. And so it set me on a different trajectory. And even the way that I thought about it, it was different.
Yeah, I think, and for me, I saw the inner workings, and always being in the church. I tell you, it was at one point I probably pulled away from the church. I had a friend named Silas Parnell, and I still remember the name to this day. Zion Temple Baptist Church. My mama didn't have the money to send me. I was in the choir. Didn't have the money to send me on this field trip. And, I had to be about 12 or 13. Anyway, they were playing in the pool. He died. He drowned in the pool. And his mom and father, that was the only child, so that was sort of my best friend, pulled me away. And I got into the inner world of Chicago, sort of underground.
Right.
So as I got older, I was always God-fearing and led me back. But I'm like, man, I've been such a bad boy throughout my life. Oh, I've got to go through a few more things.
Yeah.
Tap on the shoulder for me to get there. So I always find it interesting. And so, you had some struggles, but for the most part, you had some great mentors.
Absolutely.
But you did this while working.
Right.
Which was the interesting part. So what led you to shift to Dedicare?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. When I worked at GE and I took it for 12 years. And so simultaneously I was pastoring. I was a bivocational pastor, working. And then, the church started growing. And I just felt this sense of God to say, hey, I want you to dedicate every moment you have to ministry and what you're doing. And so I left GE. People thought I lost my mind.
They thought you lost your mind.
Yeah,
I noticed
yeah.
that.
You know that? Yeah.
Right.
You're leaving all of this?
You doing what?
Right.
You're right.
And that I started my church that I've been at for 30 years now. And the interesting thing that I will never forget it. My first annual salary, was less than what I used to tithe in the church.
Wow. And coming from GE, and just you don't have to tell me. Did you experience any domestic violence, like a slap back in or something?
You know what? Yeah, listen.
Because he had to
Yes.
look at you real strong, like, dude.
Right. Have you lost your
You
mind?
lost your
You know,
mind.
we got kids in private
Right,
school,
right,
and you know, we just moved, bought a new home,
right, right.
but you know, I have an incredible wife. We've been married for 37 years,
That's a long
and
time.
you know, she said that, and I'll never forget it when I came home to share with her. She gave me this look, just like what you know, you would
Right,
think like, dude, are you serious? That's the kind of
right,
look initially. And then she said, if you feel God led you to this, I'll support you. And that's all I needed,
right,
you know. And I said,
right.
yes. And that's the way she's been all my life in terms of for 37
That's a
years.
hell of a support system.
She's come and said, if God has called you to do this, I'll support you.
So my wife told me, if you ever make that walk, I would not be the first lady.
Yeah, she says like, no, listen, I know your family. Yeah,
You going a little bit too far to wax up, but I can
yeah.
appreciate her stance.
Yeah, oh, I do. I value that because, you know, when you're called into ministry, it's
Right,
not just you.
right.
You know,
You're
it's your
bringing the whole
entire
family,
family.
and I get it because I have a cousin now. He's a minister up in Waikiki, Illinois, and
Mm-hmm.
so we played high school football against each other, ran track. I went off to college. He stayed and worked. Was a CEO for a while. And then one day, probably about 7 years ago, he just woke up and slowly made a transition.
Mm,
Right? Then
right,
next thing you know, he's at a church, pastor leave, he become the pastor. The
right.
pew leaves, he has to build from ground up. And so I just told him, but first you got to get back to the community.
Yes,
Right? So
yes,
you got to be out in the community. So you got to show you care. And then people started to come. And
yes.
then he started to minister that way, and it was interesting to see the transition. He went from smoking cigars to drinking water.
I know the journey.
He ain't took
Yeah.
a drink in a few minutes, and I looked at him for a while. I was like, "You sure
You
you want to
sure?
do that?"
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you go right ahead. I'm just gonna
Right.
sit right here and smoke and drink. So, you shifted there to care,
Right, right,
right? What made you know that's how you wanted to give back?
right.
Because you
Well,
were already giving back from the ministry
right.
standpoint, but now your job.
Yeah, I was the chief of community building for Louisville Metro government, and a lot of folks didn't know what I did. They just thought I followed the mayor. They would see me out and they was like, "Oh, you with the mayor."
Right.
And but I was responsible for 6 government agencies. Public health was one.
I remember.
Dr. Moyer she was the chief strategy officer and over public health. At the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods with the violence prevention.
Yeah, I wondered about that because I'm still looking for the safety part. I know they trying.
Yeah, they tried. They
It
tried.
needs more money.
Yeah, yes. I got tons of stories to share with you about that. I had youth detention services that was in my portfolio. I had the Louisville Zoo, Parks and Recreation, and when I think about all of that work and what we were able to accomplish, during the time, it was phenomenal.